Hey guys, tonight we're plunging headfirst into a sleepy little slice of history that's somehow both snore-inducing and snore-filled, literally. You're about to spend the night in a medieval inn, and yes, the snoring will be outrageous. Picture this: muddy boots, soggy cloaks, flickering candlelight, and a bed that might actually be a sack of mice. You're tired, sore, and just trying to catch some shut-eye, but around you are strangers sawing logs loud enough to summon the Black Plague. And you probably won't survive this without imagining what it smells like. Spoiler: wet hay, boiled onions, and goat. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive just after dusk, the sky an iron-gray slab bleeding rain. Your boots squelch with each step, soaked through from a day's travel over rutted, half-frozen dirt roads. Every village looks the same: low wooden fences, smoke curling out of crooked chimneys, chickens plotting things in the shadows. But this village has something you desperately need: a tavern. And more importantly, a bed. Or so you hope. The inn doesn't look promising. It's leaning like it's had too much mead, half-timbered and patched with whatever the owner found lying around: old planks, moss, someone's broken cartwheel. A swinging wooden sign creaks in the wind. You can't make out the name, but the painted animal might be a lion, or a pig with aspirations. Inside it's barely warmer. A smoky hearth flickers weakly, struggling to heat the damp stone floor. You step in and the first thing that hits you is the smell: a powerful blend of stale ale, old sweat, singed hair, and boiled cabbage. Welcome to comfort, medieval style. The innkeeper, a woman with 2 teeth and the voice of someone who's fought off bandits with a skillet, sizes you up. She nods toward a corner with a few straw pallets tossed on the floor. No keys, no privacy, just first come, first served. You shuffle toward your assigned patch of hay, dodging a dog that may or may not be alive. The bed is a flat sack stuffed with straw, which crinkles when you prod it, probably also home to something with legs. The blanket is a stiff, scratchy wool square, and someone's already drooled on it. You lie down, still fully clothed because removing your boots would release a new olfactory demon into the room. Your limbs ache from the journey. Your eyelids droop. Then comes the first snore. It starts soft, just a snuffling wheeze from the man 2 feet away. He's huge, with a beard like a thatched roof and breath like fermented onions. A blacksmith, judging by his soot-streaked arms. And his snoring? Oh, you're about to get the full medieval symphony. The second snorer joins in from across the room. Higher pitched, like a goat in distress. A rhythmic he-honk, he-honk. Somewhere between dying bagpipe and alarmed goose. You open one eye. It's the village priest. You shift on your straw. It pokes you in the ribs like it holds a grudge. A mouse skitters somewhere near your knee. The room is filled with people. Farmhands, traders, maybe a pickpocket pretending to be asleep. Everyone's jammed in like a crate of turnips. There's a goat tied to the fireplace. Someone's sharpening a knife in the corner, casually. The only quiet person is the child under the bench, who's staring at the ceiling like he's seen too much. You try stuffing your hood around your ears. Useless. You roll onto your side. The straw sack burps up a cloud of dust. Someone coughs wetly nearby. There's a moment, just one, where it feels like maybe you'll drift off. The snoring sinks into a weirdly soothing rhythm. You accept your fate. Sleep begins to sneak in. And then a third snore cuts through everything. A sharp nasal whistle that could drill holes in a door. You jolt. A donkey brays outside, startled by the noise. You're wide awake again. Historians still argue whether guests in roadside inns actually got meaningful sleep, or if they simply passed out from exhaustion. Either way, this isn't exactly a Hilton. In the 14th century, privacy was a luxury reserved for nobility, and even they had to contend with their servants breathing heavily in the next alcove. For commoners like you, sleep was communal and noisy. One fact that's well recorded: inns were so overcrowded in peak seasons, like pilgrim travel or market days, that travelers had to sleep 2 or 3 to a bed, or even lie spooned in rows like log piles. Hot bedding, it was called, when you took the place of someone who just got up. Their body heat still lingering. Romantic, right? The fringe detail? There were snore walls, literally bits of cloth or wooden partitions some wealthier inns installed between shared beds to muffle the sounds. Which didn't work, but hey, points for trying. In this place though, you're lucky if your blanket isn't actively growing mold. You wonder for just a second if you should get up and ask to sleep in the stable instead. Hay's the same at least, and horses probably snore less. But then you remember, it's colder out there. And it might already be full, of other people with the same brilliant idea. So you lie back again. Embrace the scratchy wool, the snorting chorus, the dripping sound from the corner that may or may not be someone using a chamber pot. You're here. You're surviving. Medieval inns weren't meant for comfort. They were meant to keep the wolves out and the wind off your face. A man near the hearth rolls over and lets out a guttural growl of a snore so violent the goat jumps. You sigh. It's going to be a long night. The candle guttering near the door throws flickering shadows across the warped beams overhead. You're still wide awake, lying perfectly still, though your mind is doing the jittery medieval math of how many snores per minute can one man actually make? The answer apparently is a lot. And he's not even the worst offender. Because now the woman on the other side of you has joined in, an elderly wool merchant with lungs like a church bell. Her snores are deep and rolling like a wagon creaking downhill. Somehow, she's managed to sync with the blacksmith's nasal growl and the priest's goose honk, and now the room is alive with a sort of discordant harmony. A medieval orchestra, if the instruments were all noses and sinuses. You shift your weight again, the straw crackling beneath you like angry cereal. Someone else in the room mumbles in their sleep. A man groans, and not in a good way. His dreams probably involve taxes or leprosy. The air is thick with the scent of damp wool, boiled onions, and the faint tang of sheep. You try not to breathe too deeply. Inns back then weren't exactly built with acoustics in mind. Walls were often made of wattle and daub, mud, straw, and sticks slathered together like a very sad cake. Some didn't even bother with interior walls at all, opting for open sleeping halls with pallets strewn around the edges. Sound didn't just travel, it galloped. One man's sneeze could wake the entire building. And oh, someone does sneeze. Violently. You hear it echo, then a sleepy curse, then someone throwing what sounds like a shoe. Maybe at the sneezer. Maybe at the snorers. Or maybe just into the void. There's an open scholarly debate about whether certain inns had designated quiet areas, or if that's a modern myth born from wishful thinking. Some argue that monastic ghost houses occasionally offered peace for the pious. Others say everyone just suffered together in the sonic soup of medieval nightlife. Based on your current experience, you're leaning toward the latter. Eventually, your brain begins playing tricks on you. You try to focus on a single sound, one snore, rhythmic and almost soothing. Your ears follow it like a lullaby, until it suddenly stops. You lift your head just slightly. Is he dead? No. He inhales with a wheeze and resumes his vocal performance, now louder and somehow wetter. You wonder briefly if this is how people snapped in the Middle Ages. Not from war or famine, but from sleep deprivation caused by traveling Cooper's sinuses. There's no Advil, no earplugs, no soft jazz playlist on your phone. Just raw, unfiltered humanity in all its nasal glory. The fringe trick some travelers tried? Chewing on dried valerian root before bed. It's a medieval sedative of sorts, though it reportedly tastes like sweaty feet mixed with earthworms. Someone nearby might have tried it, judging by the sweet rotten funk hovering in the air. Or maybe that's just someone's socks. Hard to tell anymore. You press your head deeper into the sack of straw. It crunches unpleasantly. A tiny, cold object rolls out near your temple. Maybe a pebble, maybe a tooth. You choose not to investigate. The priest sits up suddenly, mutters something about the fire, then slumps back down. You hear a loud fart. Not from him. Probably. Across the room, someone has started snoring through their mouth, a rare and terrible skill. It sounds like wind pushing through broken shutters. You momentarily envy the goat, who seems unfazed by all of this. Its eyes are closed, its breathing even. Probably dreaming of grass. Lucky goat. You make a mental list of solutions. Cover your ears? Done that. Breathe through your mouth? Feels like you're choking on onion-scented fog. Maybe mimic their snores? Try to blend in? You give it a go, a soft, slow nasal hiss. It sort of works. It makes you feel like you're part of something. The Snore Collective. This is your life now. Mainstream historians agree that medieval inns weren't really places of rest so much as places of pause. You weren't expected to emerge refreshed and glowing. You were expected to not die of exposure. The comfort bar was very, very low. Someone near the door coughs hard. The fire flickers. A child whimpers in their sleep, and their mother shushes them with a gentle whisper. It's strangely comforting. This strange symphony of humanity bundled together against the cold, against the wolves outside, against everything. Even if everyone sounds like they're dying very slowly through their noses. You try lying on your stomach. Bad idea. You flip back over. Better, except now your shoulder's asleep. You rub it and think about home, whatever that might look like. A warm bed. A window that shuts. A mattress that doesn't contain mice. You dream of silence. Just for a moment. Then a man near the hearth coughs, snorts, and lets out a snore so aggressive it rattles the tableware. A cup falls from a shelf. Nobody reacts. You finally reach that strange twilight state, where sleep doesn't fully take you but the noises blur together into white noise. You ride the sound like a boat on choppy water. Somewhere between awake and dreaming you exist. And then, silence. Sudden. Complete. You open one eye. The blacksmith has rolled onto his side. The priest is quiet. Even the wool merchant is snuffling softly instead of roaring. You blink at the ceiling. This might be your moment. You pull the blanket up to your chin. The sack of straw groans. Your breathing slows. And then, from the next room over, you hear the unmistakable sound of someone gagging on their own snore, followed by another loud fart. Of course. Morning never really arrives in a medieval inn. It leaks in, quietly like a draft under the door. You're not so much woken as you are released from the clutches of half-sleep by the sound of someone rustling their cloak, coughing like a dying rooster, and spitting into the fire. Your eyes blink open to a ceiling beam etched with the initials of past travelers. One of them simply reads, Alf K, and you wonder if that's a name or a warning. Around you, the bodies stir. Blankets rustle. Someone groans a prayer into their sleeve. A child cries somewhere near the goat who, impressively, is still asleep. You sit up slowly. Your back protests as does your neck. There is straw in places straw shouldn't be. The wool merchant beside you is already pulling on her boots. She grunts at you as a greeting. Or maybe a threat. Hard to say, really. In the hearth, the last embers glow faintly. The landlord is already awake, sweeping the soot from the stone floor and humming what you assume is a happy tune. It sounds like someone humming through their nose while chewing bark, but bless him, he's trying. Breakfast smells drift in from the kitchen. Stale bread toasted over the fire, maybe some porridge if you're lucky. Maybe a boiled egg if someone bribed the cook. You shuffle toward the long table along with everyone else. No one speaks much. Everyone's still wrapped in the sacred post-sleep crustiness, their expressions a mix of, how am I alive? And who drooled on me? And this, you realize, is how snoring was dealt with in medieval inns. It wasn't. People simply endured it. It was part of the journey, like bad roads or fleas or getting chased by a drunk pig. You were expected to bring your tolerance along with your coin. But some clever souls found their own ways to cope. You overhear the woman next to you. She's explaining, not unkindly, how she sleeps with a clove of garlic under her tongue to calm the humors. You're not convinced it works, but it might explain why no one wants to share a blanket with her. Another man claims he paid an extra coin to sleep by the chimney, where the warmth drowned out the noise. There are rumors that some inns, especially those on pilgrim routes, kept the worst snorers in the stables, next to the mule that hiccups. Historians still argue whether snoring was ever officially addressed in policies. A few scribbled guest rules survive, but none mention noise complaints. One monk's journal from the 13th century includes a passage about Brother Nathaniel's thunderous sleep, suggesting that snoring wasn't just common, it was legendary. There were even whispered cures, of course. Tying a rock to your back so you couldn't sleep on it, popular among those whose roommates begged for mercy. Drinking chamomile steeped in goat's milk. Sleeping upright, which one scholar claims was safer for the soul, but in your opinion, a fast track to spinal collapse. The morning noise now is different. Less chaotic, more purposeful. Boots thudding, spoons clinking, someone whistling badly through missing teeth. It's almost pleasant, this medieval morning symphony. Almost. At the far end of the room, you spot the innkeeper negotiating with a red-faced merchant who claims he didn't sleep a wink due to a trombone lodged in someone's sinuses. The innkeeper, a pro at this, just shrugs and gestures toward the porridge pot. Hospitality, it seems, does not come with a mute button. You eat slowly, savoring the grainy lump of oats like it's a feast. It sticks to your teeth, but at least it's warm. A young apprentice next to you whispers that his master used to sleep with wax in his ears, beeswax, molded and pressed in deep. He says it worked, but once the wax melted during summer and flooded his ear canal, and well, that was the end of that. Someone sneezes behind you. Another person mutters a blessing, then immediately follows it with a request for a turnip. That's breakfast in a medieval inn: oats, sneezes, and root vegetables. There's a funny moment where two travelers compare bruises, not from travel but from being elbowed by bunkmates trying to silence their snores. One man proudly lifts his tunic to show a purplish welt the shape of a tankard. His snoring apparently inspired violence. And you begin to realize, there's a strange sense of community here. Everyone has suffered together. No one slept well. Everyone looks like a boiled cabbage in human form. and somehow that makes the morning bearable. The shared trauma of nocturnal noise binds you. You make eye contact with the blacksmith. He nods solemnly. He knows. Outside, the sound of hooves and cartwheels picks up. The road is calling. Most people won't stay longer than a night, maybe two if the weather's bad. Inns weren't destinations, they were waypoints. And sleep, or the lack of it, was just one of many minor miseries that made the next leg of your journey feel like an upgrade. Even if it meant riding 10 miles on a wooden saddle. As you gather your things, a cloak still slightly damp from someone's snoring drool, your pouch of coins and a crumb of dignity, you wonder how long this inn has stood. Centuries maybe. Thousands of snorers have passed through, filling these beams with breathy rattles and nasal drones. And none of them ever found the perfect solution. Maybe the goat had it right all along. You hoist your bundle and shuffle toward the door, ducking under the low beam with the practiced stoop of someone who's already cracked their head on it once. Outside, the morning air is damp and mildly suspicious, like it knows something you don't. Smoke drifts lazily from the chimney, mixing with the scent of manure and old hay, and there, standing by the trough, is the goat. She stares at you like she's judging your life choices. You nod respectfully. She's earned it. But you're not leaving just yet. The innkeeper's wife has appeared, apron already dusted with flour, pointing you toward a stable-turned lodging on the far end of the property. You're switching quarters tonight. Apparently there's a musicians group staying in the main hall this evening, and unless you want to fall asleep to the medieval equivalent of a bagpipe rave, you're being gently relocated. So you trudge across the yard, dodging puddles, and find yourself inside a smaller, more peaceful building. Less snoring, fewer elbows. But also, fewer blankets. The floor is mostly hay, and a suspicious lump in the corner might be an ex-cat. Still, it's progress. You lay out your things and look around. This place feels quieter, more isolated, used perhaps for those who truly couldn't handle the main hall. An inn's version of noise exile. There are scratch marks on the beams, little notches, tallies? Prisoner marks? Or maybe a crude snore scale measuring past offenders. Historians still argue whether medieval inns had actual segregated sleeping policies. Some suggest that nobler travelers were granted smaller, quieter chambers, while others argue it was all about coin, not class. In this corner of the world, at least, it seems that coin and complaints can shift your fate. One guest from last week allegedly faked illness to be moved into a private stall, only to be caught snoring like a church bell by midnight. The goat refused to sleep near him again. You lean back on a sack of millet and let your eyes wander. There's a bucket in the corner that probably serves 5 purposes. A small window lets in a sliver of sunlight and the faint sound of someone unsuccessfully trying to bribe a horse to move. The walls smell like warm hay and musty wool, but you've known worse. Someone else enters, a hunched man with a lute and the exhausted look of a performer who played to a crowd of drunk cobblers. He sees you, nods, and collapses in the opposite corner. Without a word, he pulls a sock over his nose and is asleep in seconds. You can still hear the faint wheeze of someone snoring in the main hall through the cracks in the boards. It's distant now, more like a foghorn in another town. Still, you recognize the pattern. That's the monk from last night. The one who sleep mumbled something about potatoes. You close your eyes for a moment and wonder if this is how they did it, how they managed to survive centuries of shared sleep and sonic warfare. Maybe it wasn't about silencing the snorers but escaping them. Retreating into quieter corners, barn lofts, or even, for the truly desperate, sleeping in trees during the warmer months. You're reminded of a peculiar passage in a 14th century letter where a traveling spice merchant wrote, "I slept upon a shelf above pigs, for there I alone could dream." A shelf. Above pigs. By choice. The concept of privacy as we know it was virtually non-existent in medieval times, especially for the poor or the traveling class. Whole families, animals included, often shared a single room. Beds, when they existed, were communal. Some were just raised platforms stuffed with straw. Noisy sleep was simply sleep. There was no shame in it. Just mild passive aggression and, occasionally, weaponized elbows. A carpenter once built what he called a snore chest. A wooden box lined with cloth where a person could sleep sitting upright, enclosed entirely. It was used exactly twice before being mistaken for a coffin and causing a village-wide panic. And yet, as you rest here in the hay-scented quiet, you realize that snoring became its own form of folklore. Tales passed from traveler to traveler about the woman who snored in perfect rhythm with the town bells. Or the nobleman who allegedly frightened off a band of thieves just by turning over in his sleep. In some towns, particularly in colder regions, snorers were humorously ranked by volume. "That's a level 4, someone might whisper in the dark, louder than the mill wheel, softer than the forge." There's even a legend, probably false, but let's not ruin the magic, of a guest in Flanders whose snore matched a popular church hymn, causing several drowsy pilgrims to start singing along in their sleep. You drift a little, lulled by the scratch of hay and the distant rhythm of footsteps, until the door creaks open again. This time it's the innkeeper himself. He glances around, spots the sleeping lute player, then looks at you. "You quiet?" he asks in the tone of a man who's been burned before. You nod, solemn as a monk. "Good," he says. "Musicians are loud, but their dreams are worse." Then he vanishes again, leaving only a scent of ale and candle wax in his wake. You chuckle softly, then curl deeper into the hay. Even with the itch of straw and the scent of someone else's socks faintly embedded in the walls, you feel a strange comfort. You found a little silence in the storm of snoring humanity. Not much, just enough. The goat passes the window and glances in. She seems disappointed. The next night you're back in the main hall, not by choice. The stall was needed for an elderly scribe with sensitive lungs and a loud opinion about butter, and the innkeeper didn't even fake an apology. So here you are again in that long low room that smells like stew, feet and indecision. You've upgraded bedding though. A generous merchant took pity and traded his padded cloak for your scratchy wool wrap. It still smells like onions, but it's softer and you suspect it muffles sound, either incoming or outgoing. You might test that theory later. For now, you're wedged between a barrel-chested tanner and a nun who pretends to be asleep every time someone speaks to her. It's hard to blame her. As candles flicker low and the room fills with a symphony of sighs, wheezes and preemptive throat clearing, you begin to notice something. The sheer strategy people employ to survive this acoustic onslaught. There's the side sleeper who shifts constantly, as if changing angles will dodge the noise. The woman 2 mats down is stuffing cloth into her ears, possibly bread. Someone near the fireplace has built a fort of cloaks and satchels, forming a sort of acoustic cocoon. And in one impressive case, a traveling herbalist has placed her head inside her own wicker basket and pulled her cloak over it like a turtle shell. Fringe? Maybe. Effective? You're starting to believe it. Historians still argue whether medieval inns encouraged such improvisations or simply turned a blind eye. Some evidence suggests innkeepers did offer sleeping screens, wooden dividers or fabric drapes, for a fee or for high-status travelers. But others say these were more decorative than functional. After all, no curtain in the world can silence the man currently emitting sounds like a warhorse gargling oatmeal. As the hours drag forward, you realize just how much of medieval sleep depended on expectation management. No one here is trying to achieve a full 8 hours. That concept would have sounded absurd. Sleep came in phases, often broken into first sleep and second sleep, with periods of wakefulness in between. Some folks prayed. Some mended clothes. Others just stared at the ceiling and tried not to scream into a bread roll. There's something oddly comforting in that idea. Sleep is something you live through, not something you conquer. It removes the pressure. You listen to the breathing, the murmurs, the cough that will eventually become legendary, and you let yourself just be. A funny thing happens around the 3rd hour. People start making peace with the chaos. The snoring becomes less annoying and more like a weather system. You can even pick out different patterns. The stop-start wheeze of the tanner, the soft hum of the nun, the gurgly rattle of the baker near the door. You're essentially sleeping inside a human wind chime. One scholar once wrote that medieval inns were the origin of what we now call sleep music. Not because they had actual music, unless you count the guy occasionally humming in his dreams, but because the sheer variety of nightly sounds forced the brain to find rhythms, to form patterns, to lull itself into accepting the unacceptable. You shift slightly and find a sweet spot on the palate, where the straw isn't poking your spine and the sounds blend just enough. It's like falling asleep in a ship's hull, noisy yes but steady, reliable, familiar. Your thoughts drift. You remember a tale from a long-defunct village in the Black Forest, where a traveling monk was so loud in his sleep that the townsfolk started sleeping around him, like spokes in a wheel. He was placed in the center, wrapped in heavy blankets and even given a small bell, so they'd know when to rotate positions based on decibel level. It's almost certainly apocryphal, but part of you wants it to be true. Some legends deserve to exist just because they make bad nights feel universal. Beside you, the nun exhales deeply, murmurs something about apples, then resumes her steady breathing. You wonder if she ever speaks in the day or if she saves all her thoughts for her dreams. And then, just as you're about to slip under, the door creaks open again. A man stumbles in, late arrival, clearly deep into the mead. He smells like smoke, fennel, and questionable choices. The room groans collectively as he weaves between sleeping forms and flops into the only remaining spot, far too close to your foot. He lets out a satisfied sigh, then begins to snore. Instantly. It's an incredible noise, equal parts steam engine and distressed owl. You can feel it through the floorboards. The tanner sits up, mutters something unholy, and throws a shoe in the general direction of the noise. It misses. Hits the merchant's pot of porridge instead. The merchant swears softly, more tired than angry. You pull your cloak tighter and try to focus on the warmth of the fire. Historians still argue whether alcohol made snoring worse, or just removed any inhibitions about making noise in general. There's even speculation that some inns subtly discouraged heavy drinkers by charging them more the next morning, an airspace fee, if you will. One dusty record from York suggests that sleepy violators were fined a copper coin if more than 2 guests complained. It probably didn't work, but it's the thought that counts. Eventually, the mead man's snores merge into the nightly tapestry. No one has the energy to resist anymore. It's late. You're warm. The nun has curled up like a cat, and the tanner is talking softly to himself, possibly dreaming of bacon. You take one last breath and let it out slowly, the sound of 100 imperfect sleepers wrapping around you like a ragged lullaby. Tomorrow maybe you'll try the basket trick. Morning hits like a poorly aimed boot to the ribs. You're not sure if you ever fully slept or if your brain just blacked out from sensory overload. The mead man is still snoring, though now it's more of a whimper than a roar, like he's lost the will to keep being terrible at breathing. The nun has vanished, slipped out at dawn like a silent breeze, and the tanner is face down, mumbling something about saddle oil and regrets. You sit up slowly. Your joints crack in protest. Your breath smells like despair. But you're alive. You survived the great snore storm of the night. You wander outside, needing a break from the stew-thick air of humanity that lingers in the inn. The sun is still low, the village sleepy, the cobblestones damp from overnight mist. Somewhere, a rooster tries to sound majestic and fails miserably, kind of like the inn's entire sleeping arrangement, really. You rub your eyes and wonder how long this system lasted. This chaotic, communal snooze soup of strangers, all crammed under one creaky roof with no earplugs and barely enough blankets. Turns out, a surprisingly long time. Communal sleeping in inns was the norm well into the 17th century, especially outside of wealthy cities. Travelers were expected to endure and adapt, both to the noise and to the general lack of privacy. There was no Yelp review, no request a quiet room, no vengeance by low star rating. You simply coped, or left. But over time things shifted. The first real change? Beds. Individual beds, actual wooden frames, not just mats or pallets, began appearing more commonly in inns during the late medieval and early modern periods. Usually for wealthier guests, of course. You still had to pay for silence. But once the idea caught on, sleeping alone, or at least with fewer bedfellows, became a mark of refinement. A status symbol even. Another innovation, room partitions. Not quite walls but more than curtains. Sometimes wood, sometimes thick wool hangings. These early privacy modules were introduced in better inns to both separate travelers and reduce noise. Because yes, even in the 1500s, people were sick of hearing each other's nostrils moan all night. And then came the rise of regulations. By the 18th century, cities like London and Paris had guilds that oversaw in standards. Inns were expected to meet basic cleanliness and comfort criteria, including separating male and female travelers, improving ventilation and, get this, providing guests with peaceful rest. Imagine that. Historians still argue whether this shift came from traveler complaints, increasing urban wealth, or just the slow creep of bourgeois comfort standards. Maybe it was all three. Or maybe someone finally snapped and threatened to take their business to a rival inn with less moaning per square foot. Even so, snoring remained an unsolved issue. There are records of inns trying clever workarounds. One Parisian guesthouse offered sleeping sachets, pouches filled with lavender and valerian, to help guests drift off faster. Another, in Bavaria, reportedly hired a boy to walk the hall at night and nudge snorers with a padded stick. He lasted 2 weeks before quitting in fear of retaliation. And while that boy might have bowed out early, his spirit lives on. Because here's the thing. No matter how advanced inns got, how many curtains they installed or sachets they handed out, the sounds of sleep remained gloriously human. People still drooled, still murmured, still groaned, sighed, and made absurd noises that no one fully owns in daylight. It's part of what makes sleeping near strangers so intimate and so hilarious. Back inside, you start packing your things. Your borrowed cloak has flattened into a kind of greasy blanket, and your bread heel from last night is now aggressively solid. Could double as a weapon or possibly a coaster. The innkeeper gives you a tight-lipped nod. You suspect he heard every complaint, every shoe thrown, and chose inner peace instead of intervention. That, or he's been partially deaf for years and considers himself blessed. You glance around the room one last time. The mead man stirs. His eyes open. He blinks and asks, "Did I snore?" You pause. Consider the trauma. Then nod slowly. Like a haunted accordion. He nods back, clearly proud. Outside, the street is bustling now. A blacksmith curses his hammer. A woman chases a chicken. The world moves on, just as loud and chaotic as the inn, only with more daylight. You start walking. And as you do, you remember something from an old monk's journal. One that scholars love to quote because it's equal parts profound and petty. He wrote, "There is no greater test of patience than sharing a roof with 40 strangers and one sinning nose." You chuckle to yourself. Because maybe that's the secret medieval inns always held. Not that people endured noise, but that they shared it. That they learned to sleep anyway. That they lived not in perfect silence, but in imperfect community. You pass a small church and catch the toll of the morning bell. And for a moment, every snore you've heard becomes part of a greater rhythm, messy, flawed, ridiculous, and utterly human. You breathe it in, and keep walking. And now, as your thoughts begin to quiet and your breath slows, let all those images fade. The creaking floorboards, the soft rustle of blankets, the odd chorus of midnight snorers, let them drift far away, like the last echoes in an empty hall. There's no more need to shift positions, no more late arrivals or phantom elbows. Just the stillness now, the quiet warmth, the soft hum you chose for background comfort. Maybe you hear the faint clink of a tavern cup or the hush of straw beneath your head, but even those begin to blur, soft and far off. Let yourself melt into the moment. No more inns to navigate, no more sounds to dodge. Just breath, and peace, and the tender rhythm of rest. You made it, you're safe, you're still. You're already halfway to dreams.